Well, in the 70s, the revival of strict meter poetry, particularly in the 70s, went hand in hand, I suppose, with this realization, specifically in the 70s in Wales, that the Welsh language was specifically under threat. It's difficult today, maybe, for somebody who was born in the 80s. I was born in 83. It's difficult for me to realize sometimes, I think, how dire the situation was at times in the 70s, because Welsh language place names weren't on signs on the roads. If you wanted to communicate with the government, you could only do it in English, and so on. So the language had been undermined and undermined and undermined for so long. It came to a point, I think, in the 70s, especially with a referendum in 1979, devolution referendum for more power to come to Wales, which was lost, and people voted against Wales having any more power in 1979. And this made people realise that something needed to be done. And I think this revival in the strict meter poetry went hand in hand with that revival to a certain extent, I think. Some Welsh strict meter poets started to use the old traditional forms to say new things in different ways than had been done before. And they were very, very inspirational poets. And they inspired, I think, the next generation before mine, to take that a step further, and in the 80s and specifically in the 90s, bring Welsh poetry and strict meter Welsh poetry specifically out to the people. So they would organise events at taverns, in pubs and in village halls and so on, and read poetry aloud again, as it had been done in long ago in the Middle Ages. Not in the same way, but it was this revival of an maybe more oral tradition or a performative tradition. So that certainly happened in the 90s, and I've inherited that tradition and that revival that happened there. So by the time of my generation, things have improved for the Welsh language, generally speaking. And things have improved too in terms of the opportunities that are open to Welsh strict meter poets. Those audiences are there, or at least there are many audiences there, ready to listen to new Welsh language poetry.